image of Canada as being this like friendly ambassador, and but there are subsidiaries, and so in that sense, it's really hard to kind of track where the money is coming from and going to. The Marlin mine in San Marcos is owned by Goldcorp, and that's a Canadian company, but it would be interesting to see. And then we were having a conversation earlier in terms of holding each other accountable and holding companies accountable. Who companies are accountable to? I mean, if there's shares, it'd be interesting to see, what are your shares, your investments, and are we to hold ourselves accountable for that as well, and how to do that. And so I think there isn't just one right answer on how to combat this, but that's definitely one start. A lot of times we choose what we can consume, etc. Sometimes, and then sometimes it's not so clear. And so one of those conversations would be a really interesting start too. And then, but as far as the names, I know there's different companies and different mines, and Guatemala, for example, has over 400 mining contracts for exploitation. They're about almost the same amount just for exploration. The difference between the two is exploration would be sort of the first step, kind of like to get an assessment, and the exploitation is they're already in the process and they're bringing in machinery. A lot of these communities are resisting physically. They are lying down in front of the machinery, and just a few months ago, one of the communities just outside of Guatemala City, it's called Mina San Rafael Las Flores, and one of the girls from the community, she's 16 years old, she was murdered by private security. And also, just to be clear, when I'm talking about military training, it's not just for soldiers. Costa Rica, that doesn't have an army, is militarizing their police. So private security, police, and the military. So, but yeah, thank you for that question, comment. And
Okay. On the brochure that was sent around, it says that 6 countries have taken themselves out of the SOA. Do you know which ones those are?
yeah, so technically the first country would be Cuba. No. But in 2002, there was a coup attempt in Venezuela, and in 2004 they're the first country after Cuba to pull out of the SOA, followed by Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, and most recently Ecuador and Nicaragua. However, I guess 2 exceptions. At one point, Costa Rica did pull out under Oscar Arias, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and through WikiLeaks, through those cables, you could see that there was intense pressure by the Pentagon, and he did start sending police back to SOA. So, and the other country that we have to take off, it's actually 5 countries, is Uruguay. Under Tabaré Vázquez, they stopped sending soldiers to SOA, but under Pepe Mujica, who was wonderful for many, many, many other things, it might be laughable, but symbolically it's important. There were 3 that were sent to SOA under Mujica, but they have mobile training teams. Basically, they don't get taught at SOA, but they have a training team that's mobile, and they go to different countries. They do in-country trainings. So a total of 98 soldiers have been trained through SOA from Uruguay. So those are the countries. Yeah.
When I was in Latin America, Guatemala, or Ecuador, or various countries, I saw a very overt type of militarism. In the streets of Guatemala, there's guys with assault weapons, uniforms sitting there everywhere. I mean, they're just normal for them. But I came back to the United States and trying to apply here what I saw there. I saw we have a very covert type of militarism. And we use our education system, the military does. There's fifth graders going every week out to the base in Silver Spring to learn how to tutor in science by the military. In our public schools, there's high schools that teach military thing. And the officer training program for the whole region, southeastern Wisconsin, is at Marquette. People from UWM, Carroll College, Carthage College, Kenosha, they want to be in the military, which the law says the government you have to offer it, but you don't have to have it on campus. But there is one campus that gets money, a contract with the Department of Defense to do it. It's Marquette. And it's the only Catholic university in the country outside of Notre Dame that has all three departments. And they teach war, violence, some of the techniques of reflex killing without conscious, without thinking about it, which is the new way of the Army. And so I'm leading up to that. There is something you can do about it right here in Milwaukee. 11:30 next December 24th, the 46th anniversary of the Milwaukee 14 burning of draft files. We're going to have a rally to stop militarism in Marquette to try to present the new president with another way of doing things. And I got some flyers about that near the door kind of thing. But that doesn't mean we don't support immigrants and nothing. It just means that we have to bring it home. We got to keep bringing it home. There's poverty, racism in Milwaukee. I lived in Milwaukee all my life, 71 years. Sometimes I was out of Milwaukee. This is my home, and there's more racism in north central Milwaukee than I've ever seen. There's more poverty, more segregation than I've ever seen in my life. And we just, pass it on. So what happens there with the Mayans in Guatemala happens here with the African Americans or Hispanics, and it's militarization of our culture. Here it is. It's more work there, but it's more subtle and true. It's a new Jim Crow, which is a speaker who talks about. We have the new Jim Crow here in Milwaukee. And we're number one, by the way, in segregation, one of the poorest cities, number one segregated city, and we have the highest criminalization rate of African American males. So this is it. This is the war, the battleground where we need to struggle, because we can't be of help to people in Guatemala unless we can do it, help ourselves, and change ourselves.
Yes, I'm from Dominican Republic, and based on what I hear from you, and I see the history repeat, and it's gonna come to an end because history cannot be repeated forever. But I was wondering, when you were talking about people that were disappearing in Central America, because in my country we have a dictator that was Trujillo, and then after when Trujillo died, then Joaquin Balaguer, that was the president. Many people disappeared, just the way you were saying. So I was questioning if he was part, because I don't know that part, if my country was part of the SOA too, because you were talking about those countries that were pulling out. So I just have a question if my country, because I know we are in the Caribbean, we are very close to Central America. So, and like I said, I came here to learn. I know a little bit of history, but I have learned a lot, and I have been putting things together. And even movies teach us a lot. Avatar is a very good movie that has taught us a lot about the United States culture, okay, in the sense of going to other countries. So I just wanted to know if Dominican Republic, some of the leaders that were part of that.
Yes. Yes and yes. The Caribbean has been just as much a part of SOA as the rest of Latin America. And Trujillo himself, I think, was an SOA grad. And actually, if anyone's interested, we only have a database that goes until 2004 because they began classifying the names of the graduates after that. But you can go to our website, soaw.org, and if you go to, I believe it says information or SOA, then you can drop down the menu and there's a grad database, and you can look by year, by country, by name, and it's a pretty complete list. I think there's right now about 60,000 names on there. In just last year though, like I said, since 2004, the names have been classified. In 2013, a California federal judge did say that it's not in the name of national security, that you can't withhold the names under national security reasons. It's actually in the public interest to know these names, and for many reasons. You know, we, even as taxpayers, we should know what our money's going to, and there's absolutely no tracking after they leave the school, which is quite interesting for many reasons too.
Yeah, when you were talking about the mines, Dominican Republic, there is a mine that doesn't belong to us, I would say. It's from another country. It's called the Falcon Bridge, and yeah, they have explored, they have taken all the gold out of the country. It's private.
And they're also taking the water source.
Yeah, we are not allowed to really like go into those places.
I think from here and then
Well,
there.
bringing it back home, there's currently a moratorium on mining in El Salvador.
Yes.
And there are major mining companies who are
Trying to sue
suing
us.
the government of El Salvador to stop that moratorium so they can go back to their mine. And one of the companies, I believe, is from Milwaukee, is the Commerce Group.
It's called what?
Commerce Group.
Oh,
Yeah, I believe there was an action in front of the White House, I think, just last week. Actually, I think on the 15th of September, on Central American Independence Day, to be in support of the Salvadoran government who is resisting these mines. Yes.
I just heard a few months ago that the country with the lowest standards for environmental protection is Chile, and I understand that the School of the Americas is moving to Chile. Is that true? And is there a connection there, do you see?
I'm not sure about the first question in terms of standards. I do know that mining in and of itself, the way that most of the mining is done, is very aggressive. Environmentally, the environmental impact is such that you need cyanide to extract a lot of these metals, and a lot of these metals, you don't just get gold. Sometimes you get really high quantities of mercury. This all goes into the water. This all goes into the community. They're the ones that have to deal with this for generations to come. And most of the mines, there's under international labor organization, there's the right to consultation. And even in the face of communities saying no, these mines still aggressively push to come in. And they're paid off, and they have, a lot of SOA grads and other private security forces that are sort of the muscle to enforce this. And as far as SOA in Chile, you can say there's a type of SOA in Chile, just as there is in Colombia. There's a multiplying effect of the school, meaning that you really don't need SOA anymore when you have SOA grads in country who can reproduce the same sorts of institutions. And so, for example, in Colombia, I think I have it written down. There's what translates to Regional Center for Strategic Studies and Security, something fancy like that in Colombia, which was created just this year, May 2014, and it says it's against terrorism, narco trafficking, organized crime, pretty much the same mission as SOA. And, it's these new SOAs, in countries, are sure to produce just as damaging effects. Yes.
Back when I went down to protest at the SOA, there was some optimism that an upcoming vote was going to actually be successful. Quite honestly, I haven't heard much in the last decade. Have there been any votes in our Congress? Have we come close? What is the current political situation? Do we have members in Congress who, I know there was a representative from out east who was very, behind it, but it seems to me he died, didn't he, or he was out of office? But where are we today as far as our Congress and moving on this issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. Congress is always changing and rotating in and out, and so it's always difficult to get the number of co-sponsors you would want to finally have it pass on a floor or even go to a vote. Right now, we introduced the last House Resolution 2989 back in August 2013. We're up to 53 co-sponsors, and that's where the grassroots movement comes in, because it's so important to push for that lobbying effort, you know, and sometimes it's really hard to make it out to DC to do the lobbying, but when they're on their recess and they're in their district office, it takes a few people coming together, and right now we're 53 co-sponsors. It's not the number we like, but it is going up. And Jim McGovern, he has been sort of our champion in Congress, and he's been introducing and reintroducing variations of the bill. And the bill specifically, it's called the Latin American Military Training Review Act, and it would be to investigate and defund the SOA. And if that did pass, what it would also call for is the establishment of a truth commission of sorts to begin investigating the period since its existence. And what that would look like, we haven't gotten there yet.
Does your organization publish a list of who those 53 are?
Yeah, and actually if you go to, I think, house.gov, you can look at all the different House resolutions that are before Congress, and you can see their names and which ones have co-sponsored. And if you wanted more information, I can put you directly in touch with our advocacy coordinator, Arturo. And I actually did bring some of our legislative postcards. They can be mailed directly to your, yes, thank you, to your representative. And if you don't know who your representative is, I can get your address and we can find that out together as well.
Here's a question for you. When the rationale of how funding works for SOA, and they start talking about criminalization and drug trafficking, et cetera, and okay, and I can see the reason why you want to defund SOA, because that's the kind of rationale that's being used to support its ongoing existence. Then let's talk about how the corruption inside those countries has to do with a wink and a whistle in the corruption of the government for the criminalized activity and the drug trade that exists there. And you know, there is that corruption inside those governments that allow those things to take place. So you know that there is the reality there, but SOA should not be the method by which those countries deal with their problems.
Right, using military solutions to social problems.
But the corruption,
really does not
the
work.
corruption reaches so high into the government, from the, you know, I mean the drug cartels own so much of upper level government that but those problems are owned by the countries, and they are there.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, each country needs to hold its own government accountable. Just like here, we need to hold our government accountable for their levels of corruption too.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely, just to make it clear, I'm not saying that, you know, by closing the school will the corruption end or anything, but that's something that each country has to start doing, and holding each of their own governments accountable.
Yeah, they gotta.
In the
they
case
gotta,
of Argentina,
Mhm.
for example, while it's not necessarily corruption, but they are putting people on trial for genocide in Argentina. They have imprisoned
Yeah.
over 200 people that were involved in the repression during the last dictatorship,
Yeah.
which is a civic military dictatorship, and they put you know, their former head of state, dictator Rafael Videla, on trial, and he died in prison.
Yeah. Well, basically, they got to go out and burn their own poppy fields. You know, basically. I mean, I'm being facetious, but that's.
And so, yeah, you do have to hold your government accountable, but there are a lot of things that I think that United States does bear a lot of the responsibility in terms of instilling and propping up a lot of these governments. I can talk about Guatemala, for example. After the peace accords were signed, one of the things that happened was they purged the army. They reduced it by a third. But these people got recycled into different groups, into the formation of the National Civilian Police force that didn't exist before. It was just a national police. They basically were the henchmen of the military. And they're the ones that kind of did the grunt work for the disappearances and the tortures, etc. And this is well documented, not from documents in Guatemala, but documents that have been declassified here in the United States under the Freedom of Information Act. You can look at Operation Sophia, Operation Victoria, and that's all accessible online. But similarly, a lot of these people that were in the higher ups of these like genocidal dictatorships got recycled into these drug cartels. And so that's where you start seeing this sort of penetration of the violence, of the corruption, of the impunity, and you know it'll be very interesting to see what happens right now in Guatemala. One of the people involved in the murder of Bishop Juan Gerardi, is everyone sort of familiar? He was a bishop in Guatemala. He was murdered 2 days after the publication of the Ad Hoc Truth Commission report, REMI, Nunca Más. It was a truth commission that was done in parallel with the official Truth Commission report, given their obstacles of time limitations, etc. And the interesting thing is you can't really understand the history of sort of social justice in Central America if you don't understand the role of at least the progressive arm of the Catholic Church, too. And so after Gerardi was killed, Colonel Pedro Lima Estrada and his son were implicated in this murder. Lima Estrada, an SOA grad, they both went to jail. He is now, the son, in a lot of trouble right now because he's been in and out of jail. He goes to spas. He has a lot of control within the prison. And now he's talking because the government is trying to distance themselves from him. And he's saying, oh, really? Why do you think I have this power? And so this is unfolding right now. And so in terms of what's happening in terms of corruption and accountability, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Okay.
Yes, mentioning Bishop Gerardi, when at the time that the Nunca Más was published, Phil Anderson, one of the people who came to Washington to lobby with us on legislation, came with tears in his eyes and a copy of the Nunca Más. He had been at dinner with the bishop on that Friday, and Monday we were going to lobby. So we changed everything. We were still mimeographing. At that time, we got all of this information out to our legislators, and I can tell you that Jim Sensenbrenner and Tom Petri, Republicans in Wisconsin, got on board at that time because we could tell the story. When you go to the SOA, could you say something about some of the people you're going to meet in the workshops who are on the front lines in their countries and who can give you so much more information? It's just so important to hear the stories from people like Maria Luisa, and many of them will be at the SOA workshops and vigil. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're actually trying to come up with the funds to get around the visa situation and bring a lot of the people. This year, actually, we had the first ever youth encuentro, a youth summit in Venezuela, and which I was lucky enough to be a part of. It was a convergence of 33 youth from 17, 18 countries, and we were able to come together for a week and pretty much locked ourselves in and started talking about what are the things that are affecting our countries, what are the things that connect these struggles, and it was really for the first time that you'd see this platform, that was this space that was created for youth to talk, because a lot of times when you come from big organizations, usually you don't see the younger folks. You'll see them 20, 30 years later if they stick around long enough, and so some of these people I mentioned in Guatemala, there was a 16-year-old girl who was murdered. Well, her friend Danilo, he was at the encuentro, and he was talking about what it was to, become politicized out of this necessity to defend your basic right to life. And so we're hoping to get him to come to the vigil And there's going to be other people as well. There's going to be Jesuit priest Padre Melo from Honduras, who was personal friends with the Jesuits that were killed at the Uca massacre. And there's Carla Lara. She's a singer from Honduras, and she has spoken out against the coup. And really, a lot of people from the front lines, that it's really important to kind of uplift these voices and give them a space, because we can do a lot here in the United States, but it's also important to know that there's a lot going on in Latin America. And something I really like about this idea of solidarity within SOA Watch as a movement is there isn't this we're looking to Latin America to see how we can save it. Rather, quite the opposite. We're seeing the sort of social movements taking place and taking inspiration from that struggle. And if you've seen any social movements, any protests in Latin America, I think one of the few marches and convergences that mirror most closely to these movements is the convergence at Fort Benning, with music, with puppets, with children, with all kinds of people busing in, and people camping out, and Laura's college, which is in Dubuque, they sleep on the stage to watch over it, and I'm lucky enough to go meet them later on during this tour. And last year was my first vigil. It took me a while to get there. I had to become a field organizer. I could never go for many different reasons, but I'm happy to go. And I've actually met a lot of people that my mom already knew from the 1980s. So, like I said, it really is coming full circle. At least for me, I came on this trip not knowing that I would meet my cousin here. So, yeah.
All right. Let's have a great round of applause for Luisa. Thank you again so much for coming here and joining us. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I don't know, I know a lot of you are Catholic in the room, and probably some of you who aren't, but there are so many terms that were said today about solidarity, about being our brother's keepers, about looking out for the poor, about human dignity. And obviously all these ideas are very well spoken in our Catholic social teaching of the Church, and that respect for human dignity and the fact that we are our brother's keepers, and we do have a responsibility not only to be caring and loving to those most in need that are right next door to us, but also to those that are across the globe, across the borders, across the oceans. And you all obviously know this and believe this in your hearts, and it's a beautiful thing that we're all here knowing that and being in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, again, in our neighborhoods that are dealing with racism and segregation and violence, not only, again, in Milwaukee, but also in the rest of our continent and across the world. So what I'd like to do is logistically, just if you didn't sign in, please do so for both Joyce's sake and for our sake.